Perhaps I should end my story right here. I think I made a mistake beginning to write at all. At least, I felt ashamed all the time I've been writing, so it's no longer literature, but penal correction. After all, to tell a long story about how I missed life through decaying morally in a corner, not having sufficient means, losing the habit of living, and all the time carefully cultivating my anger underground. Really, that's not interesting. A novel needs a hero.
Good God. Here I am thinking of doing such a thing, and I'm all in a jitter. Well, of course. Everything is in a man's own hands. And if he lets it all slip through his fingers, that's sheer cowardice. What do people fear most? What they're most afraid of is taking a new step or uttering a new word. However, I'm talking too much. That's why I do nothing. And because I do nothing, I talk too much. Lying about all day in this filthy hole and thinking of all sorts of stupid things. Raskolnikov, a student. I was here a month ago. I brought you something I want to pawn. Let me have 4 rubles for it.
Why bother me with such junk? A ruble and a half.
A ruble and a half? You must be joking.
Take it or leave it.
All right. Let's have it.
We've just met a young man called Raskolnikov. He's thinking about committing a murder. He's embarked on a run-through. His own word for it is a rehearsal. It's also the beginning of Crime and Punishment. I think the greatest thriller in the world, the king of all detective stories. It's also the first great modern novel. Its radical quality, its pervasive quality, is uncertainty. Bottomless uncertainty. Its mood is introspection. The hero asks himself, what if I'm alone? What if there's no God? What if social rules don't bind on me? What if God, society, morals don't really force me to behave their way? What if I'm alone? It's asking these questions that makes Raskolnikov the spiritual forefather of us all.
St. Petersburg, where the action takes place, was the administrative center of all Russia. In 1866, when the book was written, it already had the character of a modern metropolis.
Dostoevsky gives us its underbelly, the overcrowded tenements populated by dropouts, paupers, and psychological cripples, the insulted and injured, the victims of the ravages of early capitalism.
Young man, do you realize what it means when you have nowhere to go? that you don't understand yet. Well then, my dear sir, let me ask you a question of a general nature. How much can a poor but respectable girl earn by honest work? She won't earn 15 kopecks a day, sir. My daughter, by my first marriage, is grown up. What she's had to suffer at the hands of her stepmother, that's I'd rather not talk about. Just look at her, she says. Living with us, eating and drinking and
Kept snug and warm. Lazy slut. Well, you don't want me to do that, do you? What's so terrible about that? Who are you keeping it for?
Anyway, when Sonia came back, she put 30 rubles on the table without uttering a word. Since then, my daughter, Sophia Simonovna, has been forced to register as a prostitute. I went to see Sonia today. Asked her for some cash to take care of the dog that bit me. This half pint of vodka, sir, was bought with her money, and I'm having it. I have had it. Here I am, her own father, her own flesh and blood, and I spent all her money on drink. Well, sir, are you sorry for me or not? Huh? All right. I ought to be crucified. Crucified and not pitied. Crucify him, O God. And having crucified him, have pity on him. For it's not joy I thirst for, but sorrow and tears. It was sorrow that I sought at the bottom of that glass, sorrow and tears. And I found it. I tasted it.
Extremity, despair. Max Brod complained to Kafka. I don't like Dostoevsky, he said. All his characters are mad. And Kafka replied, oh no, they're only incidentally mad. It's the most fruitful form of human presentation. We're all mad sometimes. And Dostoevsky was fascinated by the craziness of normal psychology. We all, sitting alone, say, God, Christ, what a fool I am, or me, or I've got him, sitting alone. We all do it.
Dostoevsky was himself as extreme and morbidly sensitive as any of his characters.
Dogged throughout his life by dire poverty and epilepsy.
A gambler,
A hypochondriac.
a whiner.
One would even say a nervous wreck.
His father was a doctor, a morose and violent man.
His mother was gentle and devout. He was sent to a school of military engineering, but his real enthusiasm was for literature.
His first novel, Poor Folk, was greeted with great acclaim.
But his second, The Double, was poorly received.
In 1848, Dostoevsky joined a liberal discussion group, the Petrushevsky Circle.
They just talked French socialism. They did no harm, but they were informed on. And one morning, 4 o'clock, Dostoevsky woke up, and a lieutenant colonel in the light blue uniform of the secret police was standing by his bed. Told him to get up, dress, searched, put him in the Peter and Paul fortress. And an odd thing, neurotic young man, every sign of frailty. But he didn't break, didn't betray his friends. Others groveled, others lied. He stuck firm. He was sentenced to death, the famous mock execution to which the Tsar added some cunning touches, some cruel touches of his own, tied to a post in a white shirt. Blue sky, he said, blue sky. And a weather vane caught his eye, and he thought, this is life. This is living life. This is givagiste. And, of course, the last moment, the troopers arrived, and the execution was off, and instead, 4 years penal servitude in Siberia.
This was the great formative experience of Dostoevsky's life, which he recorded in his memoirs from the House of the Dead.
Look at that nice little boy. No one's ever cut no bits off him. No amputations.
He looks worried.
I bet he's got a lot of money.
In the criminal himself, prison develops only hatred, a thirst for forbidden pleasures, and terrible irresponsibility. Corruption and perversity, backbiting and scandal-mongering went on ceaselessly. This was hell, the nethermost pit, and the outer darkness. It would be the same again, tomorrow, and the next day, and every day for years, until the moment of freedom came. But when would that be, you thought? And where was this freedom?
The Dostoevsky prison world, the House of the Dead world, opens out into the world of Crime and Punishment and all the major novels. It's a world of cries, despairing, angry cries heard in the night. It's a world of coming and going, banging doors, drafty passages, of whispering, quarreling through thin walls. And the interiors, cheerless, always shabby, minimal, like Raskolnikov's room, yellowing wallpaper, with much longing for home, but no home. There are no homes in Dostoevsky. Think of the stove for a moment, the Russian pechka, the hearth, as we would call it. There aren't any working stoves in Dostoevsky. They're either out or malfunctioning or poisoning people even. Beds are not for sleeping soundly on in Dostoevsky. They're for throwing oneself down on, for having nightmares on, being ill on, brooding sullenly or frenziedly on.
He looked around his little room with hatred.
He had withdrawn from the world completely, like a tortoise into its shell. And even the face of the maid, whose duty it was to look after him, exasperated him beyond endurance.
Get up, sir! Get up! I brought you some cabbage soup. You must be starving. Mistress wants to go and complain about you to the police, sir.
Police? What for?
You know what for. You haven't been paying your rent, have you?
She's a fool. I'll go and have a talk to her today.
I dare say she is a fool, the same as I am. But why is it that a clever man like you lies about like a sack of coals? Why don't you ever do anything?
But I am doing something.
Are you now? Well, what is it?
Working.
What kind of work?
I am thinking.
I swear to you that to think too much is a disease. A real, actual disease. Why do I say that? Well, we all show off with our diseases. Me, especially. And I say to you that every kind of intellectual activity is a disease, all right? That's enough. Not another word on this subject you find so extraordinarily interesting.
Thinking. Another character from another book. Dostoevsky invented the underground man, Podpolny Человек. This is a 1987 figure, as modern as AIDS. We must think of vicious, spiteful thoughts. He introduces himself to us as spiteful, Yazloi. He just keeps talking. We must think of the idea of futility, the idea of no end, of no beginning, of a kind of non-sequential babble, an eternal, meaningless nightmare present that is just flaunted. He's an indecent exposer of consciousness. He's a flasher. He's, in the mind, he's one of those men who hide behind the gorse bushes as the girl golfers arrive, and he comes out, but what can he flash at them? He's nothing to wave but his consciousness.
I'm very touchy. I'm sensitive and quick to take offense, like a hunchback or a dwarf. But there have been times when, if somebody had slapped me in the face, I might even have been glad of it. I'm serious. I used to go out and take pleasure in degrading myself. You want to know why? Because it was too boring to sit and do nothing. It's true. I imagined things. I invented a life simply in order to live. Well, how many times have I taken offense? Just like that. Deliberately. No reason at all. Just putting on an act. Or even a couple of times when I simply longed to fall in love. Oh, I really suffered, gentlemen, I assure you. At the bottom of my heart, of course, I can't really believe in my own suffering. I feel a stirring of derision. But all the same, I do suffer. I'm jealous. I fly into rages. It's all out of boredom, gentlemen. It's all out of boredom. I am crushed with tedium.
Often a man endures for several years, submits, suffers the cruelest punishments, and then suddenly breaks out over some minute trifle, almost nothing at all. Yet perhaps the whole cause of this violent outbreak in a man is a mournful desire for an abrupt display of personality, a longing to be his own
self.
Daddy, why did they kill the poor horse?
God. Can I really take a hatchet? Crack a skull? Slither about in warm, sticky blood? Steel and shake with fear. Good God. Is it possible?
Dostoevsky knew that you don't have to go to prison to live in solitary confinement. Raskolnikov and the underground man are tormented by boredom and self-lacerating inertia because they're members of a new educated class in a society that gives no scope to their desires, energies, talents. Russia was authoritarian, hierarchical, controlled by a semi-militaristic bureaucracy which crushed individuality. For the aspiring educated man, there was quite literally nothing to do. But the greatest lesson that Dostoevsky himself learned in the Siberian prison was that when men feel powerless and trapped, they'll go to any lengths to assert their individuality. Well, how does this apply to Raskolnikov himself? How can he assert himself? How can he define himself? Perhaps only by some self-willed act of extreme aggression.
His final decisions all possessed one strange characteristic. The more final they became, the more absurd and horrible they appeared in his eyes. In spite of his agonizing inner struggle, he could never, during all those weeks, for a single moment, believe in the practicability of his plans. He could never, for instance, imagine that the time would come when he would stop thinking, get up, and just go there.
I brought you something. Perhaps we'd better go into the light.
Good gracious, what do you want? Who are you?
Don't you remember me? I'm Raskolnikov. I brought you the pledge I promised you. Would you want it or not? I'm in a hurry.
What is it?
The silver cigarette case. I told you about it last time.
Your hand's trembling.
It's fever.
You haven't come straight from a hot bath, have you?
It's fever. You can't help it if you've had nothing to eat.
Doesn't feel like silver to me. What did you have to tie it up like this for?
Murder. It's a central fact in all Dostoevsky's great novels. For Raskolnikov, it's a kind of test, a decisive experiment on himself to prove his own nature. Will that blow of the axe, the murder, will it cut him free from all the tormenting questions, contradictions, uncertainties that threaten to bury him? Or will it cut him off irrevocably from the very possibility of freedom?
Back in his room, after the murder, Raskolnikov collapses with exhaustion. He's not only killed the old woman, but also her sister, Lizaveta, who disturbed him when he began to rob their flat.
What if it's already beginning? What if my punishment is already beginning? Yes. Yes. It's true.
What's the matter with me? Why was he beating the landlady?
Who was beating the landlady?
Just now. The policeman on the stairs.
It's the blood.
Blood. What blood?
Nobody's been beating the landlady. It's the blood inside you making a noise. It always does that when it starts getting clotted in your liver. That's when you start to see things, sir.
Iron beak.
Flag crusher.
You peck us to death, you and your kind.
Now Fyodor's breaking gypsum.
And getting fat on prison food.
Sometimes I absolutely hated my fellow sufferers. They, after all, were among their own kind, among companions they could understand. It is different with the well-bred man, the gentleman. He will be despised, and he will be eternally tormented by the consciousness of his alienation and solitude.
For me, Crime and Punishment is the most powerful, the most poetic account of self-alienation through evil doing since Macbeth. Macbeth thought he heard a voice. Methought I heard a voice cry, "Sleep no more. Macbeth hath murdered sleep, the innocent sleep." Sleep no more. Raskolnikov must have often murmured to himself, "Sleep no more." He'd lost his peace of mind. And the rest of the novel is the story of the struggle to recover that peace of mind. What Dostoevsky describes as rejoining the human family, of getting out of this terrible trap of self, this nightmare of alienation and solitude.
Whoops! Careful with the furniture.
Sorry.
Remember, it's public property.
Sorry. Just that there's a little business I'd like to discuss with you about the old woman, the pawnbroker who was killed.
I see. Well, sit down.
Well, the fact is, she had one or two things of mine, and I'd like to inquire about reclaiming them.
All you have to do is send us a written statement.
He knows.
I'm sorry to trouble you with such trifles. It's just that the silver watch was the only thing of my father's we had left. If my mother thought it was lost, I'm sure she'd be in despair. Women.
I'm sure your things are quite safe. As I said...
Was it all right? Did I overdo it? What did I say? Women.
You see, I've been expecting you here for some time. The old woman wrote down the names of all of her clients, and you're the only one who hasn't found it necessary to come forward.
I'm afraid I haven't been very well.
Yes, I heard that. Still look rather pale.
No, I don't. I'm fine now. Anyway, this is ridiculous. I'm wasting your time.
Good heavens, no, on the contrary. I find it fascinating to look and listen. I know. I'll get some tea. Might be a minute.
He's just calmly spitting in my face. Maybe I'll blurt out everything. Right in your ugly mug. Then you'll see how I despise you. But what if I'm imagining it? God, I'm all nerves. They've got no facts, that's the main thing.
That won't do, gentlemen. Give me facts.
Oh, I've got the most terrible hangover. I went to a party last night. Everybody was tanked up on punch and holding forth on the subject of is there such a thing as crime or not?
Why not? It's an ordinary social question.
It all brought to mind an article of yours, which I had the pleasure of reading in the periodical magazine a couple of months ago.
My article? I didn't know they published it.
My dear fellow, it's a fact.
As far as I remember, I dealt with the psychology of a criminal during the whole course of his crime.
Yes. It was the end of the piece that interested me, where you hint at the existence of certain people who actually have the right to commit all sorts of enormities and are, as it were, above the law.
Not exactly. I think I argue that the really extraordinary people, the Napoleons and Mohammeds and so on, demanded the destruction of the present in the name of a better future. If for the sake of that idea a man has to step over a corpse or wade through blood, then in my opinion he's absolutely entitled.
I see. But how are we to distinguish the extraordinary people from the ordinary ones? Don't you think they ought to introduce a special uniform? Wear a badge or be branded in some sort of way? It'd be a bit frightening if a misunderstanding should arise. Suppose, for instance, a young man decides that he's a Napoleon and decides to, well, step over an obstacle. See what I mean, don't you?
It could happen. Vain and stupid people might fall into that trap.
Well, what about it?
Well, what about it? It's not my fault, is it? You've got your prisons, your police, your magistrates. So catch your thief.
What if we do catch him?
Serves him right.
You're logical, at any rate. I'm sorry, but I can't resist just asking you one more little question.
All right, what is it?
It's a rather amusing idea, a psychological one. I mean, when you were writing your article, you couldn't possibly have thought that, that you yourself were just a wee bit of an extraordinary man, could you?
Quite possibly.
Sorry, I didn't really mean it, of course. I was merely interested from a literary point of view, just to make sure that I understood your article.
My God, how obvious and insolent that is.
Hunter and Hunted. The scenes with the examining magistrate Porphyry are among the most gripping in the whole book. And while Raskolnikov is circling round his interrogator, he's also circling round himself, hunting himself down, trying to make sense of what he's done. Here, we're not in search of a culprit, we're in search of a motive. And in trying to make sense of what he's done, Raskolnikov tries all kinds of explanations. From, I decided to get hold of the old woman's money, to, I wanted to dare. That was my only motive. And even, I just did it. Dostoevsky was anxious, in his own words, to explain the murder one way or another. But his genius wouldn't let him. His genius told him that we are endlessly mysterious to ourselves, that what we call reasons are often just rationalizations, that we're capable of thinking one thing but doing another without knowing why. The single straightforward reason for the murder is something that never arrives. The whole book is the reason. I wanted to become a Napoleon. That's Raskolnikov's favorite among his many attempts, his many versions of his reason for having done what he has done. Power waits the really extraordinary man who is prepared to stoop and grab that power. This is Raskolnikov at his most demonic. It anticipates Nietzsche, certainly, and even 20th century fascism. But the small man who only thinks he's a Napoleon is just a clown.
A Napoleon who crawls under an old woman's bed. The old hag is rubbish! I didn't kill a human being. I killed a principle. Am I a man? Or am I some trembling vermin like the rest? I'm a louse. I chose the most useless louse and killed her. And now I'm lower than the louse I killed. And I knew beforehand I would say that to myself after I killed her. Allah commands. And the trembling vermin must obey. Obey. Trembling vermin. Do not desire. That's not your business. Oh, I shall never, never forgive the old hag.
It's the moon that makes everything so still. It must be asking a riddle.
In the notebooks, Dostoevsky repeatedly considers the idea of suicide. Raskolnikov, aware of failure, will blow his brains out. But he doesn't. He goes to the daughter of the drunken Marmeladov, who we met early in the book, with the vodka jug in his hand, with nowhere to go. He goes to the daughter, Sonia, the prostitute.
I'm a sinner, a great sinner.
Yes, you are, a great sinner. And do you know why? Because you've betrayed yourself for nothing. You live in this filth which you hate, and you're not saving anyone from anything. Why don't you just throw yourself in the river? Wouldn't that make more sense?
What will happen to the family then?
So that idea has crossed her mind. And what keeps her from it? The thought of sin. She must be mad.
So you pray a lot to God, Sonia.
What would I be without God?
And what does God do for you?
Shut up. Don't ask. You're not worthy.
She's mad, all right.
He does everything.
Where's the place about the raising of Lazarus? Read it for me, Sonia.
Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die.
The prisoners were very zealous in their devotions, and each of them always brought his pitiful kopeck for a candle or to put in the collection. Perhaps as he gave it, he thought, I, too, am a man. And in the sight of God, all men are equal.
Do you remember what I wanted to tell you yesterday? As I was leaving, I said that if I came today, I'd tell you who killed Lizaveta.
How do you know?
I know.
Why? Have they found him?
No. They haven't.
So how can you know?
Guess. Take a good look. Don't torture me, Sonia.
What have you done to yourself?
It's so strange embracing and kissing me when I've told you that. You don't know what you're doing. You won't leave me, Sonia, will you? Never.
Dear God, never. I'll follow you to prison.
Maybe I'm not thinking of going to prison, Sonia.
How could you? How could you, a man like you, do a thing like that?
I wanted to commit a robbery. For God's sake, stop it, Sonia. Can't you see I've killed myself, not the old hag? Leave me alone. What should I do now? Tell me.
Get up. Go at once into the street. Bow down and kiss the earth which you have defiled. And say to all men aloud, I am a murderer. Then God will send you life again. Will you go, will you?
What are you talking about? Do you want me to give myself up?
Accept suffering and be redeemed by it. That's what you must do.
No. I can't do it. I can't go to them.
The only book Dostoevsky was allowed in prison was a battered New Testament like Sonia's. And the only evidence of humility he found in the prisoners lay in the traditional Christianity still alive among them. This made a deep impression on him. And in Crime and Punishment, he began a long struggle with himself about the existence of God.
When Dostoevsky died in 1881, he'd given us The Idiot, The Possessed, and The Brothers Karamazov, as well as Crime and Punishment. He'd also become engaged in a running battle against the complacent bourgeois spirit of Europe and all Western-inspired ideas of the ordering of society, both capitalist and socialist. Against these, he promoted a mystical Russian idea of brotherhood, togetherness, founded on the sublime Christian virtues of love and self-sacrifice.
Accept suffering, Sonia says to Raskolnikov. Accept suffering and be redeemed by it. We're touching something crucial here in Dostoevsky's fiction, the redemptive power of suffering. And those who don't like Dostoevsky often say, what's so good about suffering? Suffering lowers, suffering destroys. And indeed, they have only to point to any of the big books to say that from crust to core, they're saturated in suffering. Well, Dostoevsky thought that suffering and love are intertwined in our human solidarity. Suffering because we are all guilty in relation to each other. We're all the time inflicting suffering, harm on each other. And our unity in love is the obverse of our guilt in suffering. Sonia thought this. Sonia reads the New Testament to Raskolnikov. Sonia sends him out to confess. He kisses the filthy earth. He accepts suffering. Sonia and love broke him, wrote Dostoevsky in his notebooks. Raskolnikov has proved himself weak in his attempt to stand alone. He's exiled himself from his own humanity. Only through confession and accepting the consequences of that confession can he find his way back to himself and rejoin the human family.
It was I who killed the old woman, moneylender, and her sister, Lizaveta, with an axe, and robbed them.
It has taken Raskolnikov hundreds of pages to find these simple words of confession. Pages written, remember, in 1866, the middle of Queen Victoria's reign. And yet the pages of the novel, challenge Victorian assumptions to the very root. They prefigure the condition in which we find ourselves. The external conditions of urban decay, squalor, false neighborhood, crowding but no neighbors, interior calamities of narcissism, of despair, of the deep, deep radical boredom, of aggression, senseless violence. Indeed, you can sometimes switch, or you feel you can switch aggression and boredom, as if they were interchangeable. And all this delivered with unremitting stress, the stress of great art. I think it's a touch of Dostoevsky's genius at its most piercing that the punishment of the murderer should begin on the very first page of the novel with his first promptings towards the murder. His punishment in everything except its public aspect. equally the purest Dostoevsky. The paradox that the regeneration of the criminal begins with that public punishment. In a word, the house of the dead is the place of birth.
It was love that brought them back to life. The heart of one held inexhaustible sources of life for the heart of the other. And what did all the torments of the past amount to now? Life had taken the place of dialectics.
We're so unused to living. We often feel something like loathing for real life. And we're all agreed. It's better in books. So what is it we scratch about for? What do we cry for? What do we beg for? We don't know ourselves. And it would be worse for us if our stupid whims were indulged. Oh, loosen our chains and I assure you, we would all immediately beg to be put back under discipline. Oh, I can see you're angry with me. You're only talking about yourself and your underground misery. Don't dare speak of all of us. Excuse me, gentlemen, I've only carried to a logical conclusion in my life what you didn't dare take more than halfway. And you called your cowardice common sense. You comforted yourselves with a self-deception. So, perhaps I turn out to be more alive than you. Look harder. After all, we don't even know where real life is lived nowadays, or what it is. We don't know whose side to be on, where to give our allegiance, what to love, what to hate, what to respect, or what to despise. We even find it difficult to be real human beings with flesh and blood of our own. We're ashamed of it. We're always striving to be some unprecedented kind of generalized human being. We're born dead. We've long ceased to be the sons of living fathers. We've become more and more contented with our condition. We've acquired a taste for it. Soon we shall invent a method of being born from an idea. But that's enough. I'll say no more from the underground.